Welcome back to another session of Reformed Thinking. We're glad you're here with us. Today we are opening our Bibles to the very end of Matthew chapter 10. We're looking specifically at verses 40 through 42.
It's a short passage, just 3 verses, but, the sources we're looking at today suggest these few lines carry a massive amount of theological weight.
They really do. To set the stage for you, the title for our deep dive today is Receiving Christ by Receiving His People. Now, I have to be honest. When you first read these verses, talking about welcoming people, giving out cups of water, it sounds like a lesson on manners. It sounds like Jesus is just teaching us to be polite hosts or, to practice good old-fashioned hospitality.
It definitely sounds that way to the modern ear. We have a tendency to sort of domesticate these texts. We make them safe. We think of dinner parties and guest rooms.
Right. But as we dug into the source material, the commentaries, theological essays, the Greek text, it became very clear, very quickly, that this is not about etiquette. The sources describe this passage as being about spiritual verdicts and covenantal allegiance.
And that is a huge shift.
A massive shift in tone from just a simple lesson on kindness.
That's right. We're dealing with something far more, I'd say, dangerous than table manners here. I mean, we live in a time where people love to separate spirituality from organized religion. You hear it all the time.
Constantly. I love Jesus, but I don't need the church.
Or I'm spiritual but not religious. And what makes this text so shocking, or as one of our sources put it, so scandalous, is that Jesus completely refuses to allow that separation. He makes a claim here that's, well, it's breathtaking. He ties his own honor, and even the honor of God the Father, to how we treat his human messengers.
And that really is the hook, isn't it? The idea that the Holy God identifies himself with imperfect people.
It's the central tension of the passage. We want a God who is high and lifted up, accessible through private meditation or a walk in the woods. But Jesus says, no, if you want to receive me, you have to receive this person I sent.
And that person is usually not all that impressive by worldly standards.
Not at all. So the scandal is that God effectively stakes his reputation on the reception of his servants.
Okay, so let's unpack this to really get why this is a spiritual verdict and not just a hospitality seminar. We have to look at the context. This is the conclusion of what scholars call the mission discourse. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Matthew 10 is a commissioning scene. Jesus has called the 12, given them authority, and now he's sending them out. But we have to remember the atmosphere of this sending.
He isn't sending them to stay in luxury hotels or to be greeted by parades.
Not even close. No, earlier in the chapter, the imagery is really intense. He says he's sending them out as sheep in the midst of wolves.
That's the setting, so they're vulnerable.
They're vulnerable, they're likely poor, they've been stripped of earthly security. Jesus has explicitly warned them they'll be handed over to councils, flogged in synagogues.
And hated by all for his name's sake.
Right.
He even warned them that families would be torn apart.
Right. Brother against brother, father against child. That context changes everything. So when Jesus starts talking about receiving them in these final verses, the stakes are effectively life and death.
We have to strip away our modern idea of a dinner party.
Precisely. In the first century, for a Jewish household to open its door to a disciple of Jesus, someone preaching a kingdom that was seen as a threat to the religious establishment, that was a risky move. It wasn't just being nice. It was an act of allegiance.
The sources mention this idea of an enacted parable, especially with the whole shaking the dust off their feet thing. Can you explain that connection?
Yes. Jesus tells the disciples that if a house or town doesn't receive them, they're to shake the dust off their feet as they leave. That's a sign of judgment. It's a symbolic way of saying, we have nothing to do with you. You're standing outside the covenant.
So the opposite must be true then.
The opposite is true. When a household does open its door, it's yielding to the reign of Christ. It's a visible, physical way of saying, I accept the message you're bringing. It's an enacted parable of salvation.
So hospitality in this context is almost an act of war. You're siding with the rejected king against the world.
That's a really helpful way to put it. You're identifying with a contested message. The source material highlights that receiving here is a moral and spiritual response to the arrival of divine authority. You aren't just evaluating a person's personality.
You're rendering a verdict on the king who sent them.
That's it. The stakes are eschatological. They have to do with final judgment and salvation. To receive the messenger is to receive the kingdom. To reject them is to invite judgment.
That certainly raises the intensity of a cup of cold water.
It changes everything.
Let's move into the text itself. Verse 40 says, whoever receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. There's a very specific legal idea behind this, isn't there?
Yes, and this is fascinating. The sources point to the Jewish legal principle of the shaliach.
The shaliach. Can you break that down for us?
It's the ancient law of agency. The rabbinic maxim was a man's agent is as himself. So if a king sends an ambassador to a foreign country, how that ambassador is treated is legally interpreted as how the king himself is treated.
If you insult the ambassador, you've insulted the crown.
You've insulted the crown. And Jesus is applying this exact logic to these fishermen and tax collectors. He's establishing a divine chain of reception, if you will.
A chain of command.
A clear chain of command. The disciple represents Christ, and Christ represents the Father. So you have this direct link from the dusty roads of Galilee all the way to the throne of God.
And this connects directly to our theology as Reformed believers, particularly regarding union with Christ.
It's the bedrock of the passage. We look at the Westminster Confession of Faith, chapter 26, which talks about the communion of saints. It tells us believers are united to Jesus Christ in his graces and sufferings. It's a mystical union.
This isn't just a metaphor.
It's not just a metaphor. The head Christ actually feels what is done to the body, the church.
I can't help but think of Saul on the road to Damascus here.
That is the perfect cross-reference.
Yeah.
When Jesus confronts Saul, he doesn't say, "Why are you persecuting my people?" or "Why are you persecuting my church?" He asks, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?"
So Saul was striking Christians, but he was hitting Christ.
Yes. And Matthew 10:40 is the positive side of that very same coin. To open the door to a Christian is to open the door to Christ.
This really does dismantle that modern error we touched on earlier, the idea that you can bypass the church to get to God.
It makes it a theological impossibility. You see, the text asserts a very high Christology. Christ is the exclusive mediator. You can't bypass the Son to get to the Father. Jesus is the only way.
Yeah.
But this text adds another link to that chain. You generally cannot bypass the apostolic message carried by the church to get to the Son.
That is a hard pill for our individualistic culture to swallow. We like to think we can act as free agents.
It is hard. We love the myth of neutrality. We think we can be open-minded observers of Christianity. But Jesus says there is no middle ground. A verdict on the messenger is a verdict on the sender.
If you slam the door on the message because the messenger is awkward or poor,
You've slammed the door on God the Father.
that's sobering.
It's meant to be. But, it's also a comfort. If you're the one being rejected, you know it isn't really just about you. And if you're the one receiving, you know that you are, in a very real way, touching the divine.
Moving on to verse 41, Jesus gets more specific. He mentions receiving a prophet and a righteous person. He says, "Whoever receives a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward." Let's break down these categories. First, what is a prophet in this context?
This is where we need to be careful and precise. The source material takes a clear cessationist stance here, which aligns with our Reformed understanding.
Right, so we're not talking about people predicting the future or getting new, direct revelations from God today.
Correct. The original foundational office of the prophet, someone who receives that direct new revelation to lay the groundwork of the church, that office has ceased, as Paul tells us in Ephesians 2:2 now. The footing is laid. You don't keep pouring concrete.
So how do we apply the term prophet to our context today?
Functionally, the prophet in this passage represents the minister of the word. It refers to the one who faithfully exposes and proclaims the scriptures. When you receive a faithful pastor or a missionary who is preaching the Bible, you are receiving a prophet in the functional sense of that word.
And what about the righteous person?
That would refer to the general believer who is marked by covenant fidelity. This isn't a self-righteous moralist or a Pharisee. This is a Christian who is bearing the fruit of the Spirit, living a life of obedience.
Now, Jesus repeats a very specific phrase here. He says, "In the name of." Receive a prophet in the name of a prophet. Why the repetition?
That phrase is the key to the whole verse. It defines the motive. You see, you can host a preacher for all the wrong reasons.
Sure, you might host him because he's famous.
Or because he's funny, or because you think being close to him will give you influence in the church, or you want to network. But Jesus says that doesn't count. The blessing is attached to the recognition of their commission. You receive him because he is a prophet. You welcome her because she is a righteous person. You're recognizing their identity in relation to God.
It strips away all the hypocrisy. You're not doing it for what you can get out of it socially.
Not at all. And it also seems to require some discernment, doesn't it? You have to know they are actually a true prophet.
That's a crucial point. It
Yeah.
corrects gullibility. If we're to receive a prophet as a prophet, we must determine if they're actually speaking the truth. We don't receive false teachers. We don't bankroll heresy. It implies a hospitality that is warm-hearted but has its eyes wide open to the truth. Now let's talk about the payoff. The text promises a reward. He will receive a prophet's reward. I can hear some of our Reformed listeners getting a little nervous. Are we talking about earning salvation here? It sounds transactional.
It is a valid concern, and we have to tread carefully, but the text is explicit. We must have a robust doctrine of rewards, or misthos in the Greek. The Westminster Standards help us here. This is not Roman Catholic merit.
Yep.
We are not engaging in a transaction where God becomes our debtor, as if we do a good deed and God now owes us wages.
So how does it work within a framework of grace?
It's a reward of grace. St. Augustine put it beautifully when he said God crowns his own gifts. When we do good works, it's God's Spirit working in us. And then God, in his incredible kindness, decides to reward the very works he enabled us to do.
It's grace all the way down.
Precisely. And the nature of this specific reward is just fascinating. It implies partnership, or koiunos in the Greek. Think about it. If you support a missionary, if you feed a preacher, if you drive the evangelist to the airport, you're sustaining their work.
You're part of the logistics team for the kingdom.
Yes. And Jesus says that because you sustained the work, you share in the fruit of the work. The person who pays the check shares in the preaching of the word. You might never stand in a pulpit, you might never translate a Bible, but if you receive the one who did, you share in the prophet's reward.
You become a partner in the spiritual dividends.
That's a great way to put it. It's incredibly encouraging for those who feel like their role is just support.
There is no just support in the kingdom.
No, it's all linked.
And that leads us perfectly into verse 42. Jesus shifts the focus entirely. He moves from the prophet and the righteous person, who are, somewhat high-status figures, down to these little ones.
This is the descent to the lowly, and I love this shift. Jesus knows our hearts. He knows we are prone to hero worship. We love the prophets. We love the big speakers, the conference headliners. But here, Jesus points to the microi, the little ones.
Who are the little ones? Are we talking about children?
In Matthew's gospel, while it can include children, it often refers to the disciples themselves in their vulnerability. It's the socially insignificant believer, the one with no power, no influence, no resources.
The awkward convert.
The awkward convert, the weary missionary who comes back broken, the person in the pew who doesn't have much to offer you socially.
And look at the specific act Jesus highlights. He doesn't say, whoever buys them a chariot or whoever builds them a new house. He says, whoever gives one of these little ones even a cup of cold water.
Why cold water? What is the significance there?
Well, it represents the ordinary. In that climate, cold water was a mercy, but it was also the cheapest, most common thing available. You didn't need to be wealthy to give it. You didn't need to be talented. It is accessible to every single person.
So it's a synecdoche apart, standing for the whole.
Right. It stands for any act of simple mercy, but again, the motive is key, because he's a disciple.
This seems to be a direct strike against pragmatism.
It destroys it. The source material stresses this heavily. We live in an age of celebrity Christianity. We value ministry by its size, its utility, its fame. We want to host the famous speaker because it makes us look good.
Right.
Jesus rewards the one who helps the unnoticed saint. The idol of pragmatism says, I will invest in this person because they can do something for me. Jesus says, invest in this person because they belong to me.
That is the whole difference. And look at the guarantee he gives. The Greek grammar here is so emphatic. It uses the phrase umo with the aorist subjunctive.
Okay, break that down for us. That sounds technical.
It's a double negative, essentially. It is the strongest possible negation in the Greek language. You could translate it as, he will by no means, under no circumstances, ever lose his reward.
That's a divine guarantee.
It is divine accounting. The world forgets small kindnesses. If you give a ride to an elderly lady or bring a meal to a sick family, the world doesn't write a newspaper article about it. It just vanishes. But Jesus says God records it in indelible ink.
It makes the smallest act of kindness into an eternal investment.
It does.
I want to pivot now to how we apply this, using the categories of law and gospel, which is so central to our Reformed framework. How does this text act as the law? I mean, how does it condemn us?
Well, it acts as a mirror. And if we're honest, when we read this, we have to ask ourselves, do we only love the great ones? We're guilty of the sin of partiality, which James 2 warns against so strongly. We fawn over the rich, the educated, the cool people in church. And we often ignore the little ones, the people who are socially awkward or needy.
And according to this text, if we ignore them, we're rejecting the king.
That's the condemnation. It exposes our splendid sins, that our kindnesses that are actually just selfishness in disguise because they're done without any reference to Christ or his people.
That's heavy. So where is the gospel? Where's the comfort in all this?
The comfort is found in looking at Christ. He is the ultimate sent one. He is the ultimate little one. Think about it. He was rejected so that we could be received. He cried out, "I thirst," on the cross so that we could be the ones to give the cup of water.
So our standing with God doesn't depend on our hospitality record.
No, and praise God for that. We are not received by the Father because we were perfect hosts. We are received because we are hidden in the Son. That is the indicative who we are in Christ.
And that indicative then fuels the imperative, what we're commanded to do.
Correct. We don't labor to earn salvation. We labor out of the overflow of the salvation we have already received. This is the third use of the law. It guides our gratitude. It changes that cup of cold water from a burdensome duty into a liturgical act of worship.
We're ministering to the Lord of glory when we minister to his people.
Yes.
Let's get really practical here. We've talked about the theology, but what does this look like on a Tuesday afternoon? And how do we correct some of the distortions we see in the church about this?
Well, first we have to correct the prosperity gospel distortion. You will hear TV preachers use this text to say, sow a seed into my ministry, give me money, and God will give you a financial reward.
To turn the prophet's reward into a get-rich-quick scheme.
It's a gross twisting of the text. The context here is suffering. The disciples are sheep among wolves. They are not flying on private jets. The reward is almost certainly spiritual, eschatological, and relational. It is not a promise that God will pay off your mortgage if you tip the pastor.
Okay. On the other hand, we have the distortion of sort of suspicion versus gullibility.
Yes, we touched on this. We must discern. We shouldn't be naive, but we also shouldn't be cynical. Some people are so afraid of being taken advantage of that they close their hearts to needy saints. This text calls for a warm, open-handed love that is also wise.
Give us some real-world examples. What is a cup of cold water in the 21st century?
It's opening your home on the Lord's Day to visitors, and not just your friends, but the strangers. It's supporting that unknown pastor in a rural area who is faithfully preaching to 30 people. You can partner in his reward by sending a check or just praying for him.
Small does not mean insignificant.
Not at all. It could be driving an elderly member to a doctor's appointment. It could be just listening to someone who is lonely and tells the same stories over and over.
That requires patience, which is a resource just like money is.
It absolutely is. And when you do that in the name of a disciple, you are ministering to Jesus.
I think there's also a word of encouragement here for the little one listening.
Yes. If you are listening and you feel insignificant in the church, you don't have a title, you aren't famous, maybe you're struggling, you need to know this. You are not forgotten. You are so precious to Christ that he treats kindness shown to you as kindness shown to him. You carry a dignity that the world cannot see.
And for the giver, the one doing the unnoticed work.
No act is wasted. No prayer, no meal, no ride, no check is lost in God's economy.
So as we wrap up this divine chain we talked about, it really does bind the humblest believer to the very throne of God.
It implies that the local church is the embassy of the kingdom. When we gather, we are in the presence of the king's ambassadors.
So here's our final provocative thought for you to chew on. Next Sunday, when you're sitting in church, look at the person in the pew next to you. Maybe they're a bit awkward, maybe they're needy, maybe they're just incredibly ordinary.
And the challenge of this text is to realize that how you treat them is the truest barometer of your love for the invisible God. You cannot love the God you don't see if you don't love the brother you do see.
That changes the way we view coffee hour, doesn't it?
It changes everything.
Go out this week and look for an opportunity to offer that cup of cold water. Thank you for joining us on Reformed Thinking.
Grace and peace to you.